Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history. Big it up. Tradition and culture, our heritage, historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington. Big it up. This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history. Big it up. Tradition and culture, our heritage, historic Bridgetown and its garrison.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Ron Johnson, Senior Cultural Policy Officer in the Division of Culture, Prime Minister's Office. On behalf of the Division of Culture, I welcome you to the Heritage Month series of webinars, The Dollars and Cents of Heritage. This year, in support of the United Nations International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development, the theme for Heritage Month is Building a Heritage Economy for Sustainable Development. The heritage sector in Barbados has been negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The sector, which is largely dependent on tourists, comprises a wide range of businesses, such as museums, historic sites and buildings, gardens and landscapes, and tour operators. This evening, we will be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the heritage sector in Barbados. The purpose of this webinar is not only to discuss the impact, but to look to the future as to how to assist the development of this sector and place it firmly within the creative economy. We have 3 panelists this evening with us who are all involved in the business of heritage. Mr. Peter Stevens from the Garrison Consortium and Barbados National Trust, Mrs. Dawn Lisa Callendar of Characters of Barbados Tour, Mr. Kevin Farmer, Deputy Director of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. Welcome, panelists. Before we get started this evening, I would like each panelist to say a bit about the organization you represent. I'll start first with Peter Stevens.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, well, I work for the Barbados Garrison Historical Consortium, which we generally refer to as the Garrison Consortium. And I also head up the Barbados National Trust as its president. At the consortium, we were generally tasked with looking at ways in which to promote the garrison as a historical site. But in the sort of rules of our organization, we were essentially mandated that every project that we were to develop had to have, to some degree, financial sustainability. So we looked at everything from that point of view, in that once whether it required grant funding to start up or not, its long-term future was built on self-sustainability. At the National Trust, we are a charity. We have an obligation to the country in promoting conservation, promoting our heritage, both natural and cultural heritage. And in that respect, the scope of the National Trust is much larger, and our national obligations are much more important. And in general view, that is what I do on both parts of those organizations.
Thank you, Peter. Let's have Dawn Lisa on to talk about her organization.
Thank you so much for having me, Sharon, and thank you to the Ministry of Culture and the Creative Economy for hosting. Well, Characters of Barbados is part of what we like to call Living Heritage Barbados. We are a private tour company, and our focus is really on creating interactive, theatrical, that's very important, heritage products, and not just tourist products for Barbados as a whole. We started in 2015. We have 2 main products, which most of the time have been focused solely on cruise ships, as well as private tour companies, tour operators, and media coming into Barbados. One of them, the characters of Bridgetown Walking Tours, where we specifically focus on Bridgetown and somewhat the historic Garrison, but we mainly stay in the Bridgetown area. And we bring our tours to life with actors and singers and minstrels. And what is specific about our tours as well too is that you're toured by a character in costume, whether they be a lighterman if they're doing the maritime history of Bridgetown, or a huckster if we're doing markets. We also have celebrations of rhythms, which is our heritage show. It's a full musical production, an ambitious musical production, which we only really now do privately because, again, we have grand ideas, but we need funding, as with most heritage things in Barbados. And so we create heritage products for our not only local, but regional and international audience, specifically with a theatrical thrust, to be interactive and fun and interesting, to bring heritage to a modern focus for all Barbadians and visitors. And I guess that's who we are in a little nutshell.
Thank you, Don Lisa. Now we'll ask Kevin to say something about his organization.
Thank you, Sharon. I want to thank the Ministry of Culture for inviting us to this webinar. In a nutshell, the Barbados Museum and Historical Society is a national museum. We are dedicated to the preservation and conservation acquisition of Barbadian artifacts, both in terms of natural history, archaeology, culture, as well as intangible history, and to create exhibitions and educational content for Barbadians. And at the same time, to put on productions beyond exhibitions for Barbadians, so that we can teach them about their history. They can learn and interact with us. So everything from traditional exhibitions to bus and walking tours to interpretive outdoor signage are some of the things that we do in order to educate Barbadians about Barbadian history. So that's basically us in a nutshell. And like the National Trust, projects that we get involved in must be sustainable, because that is the way in which we can actually function. If they aren't sustainable, then they can't happen for us. So COVID has been a difficult time, but it's also been a time where we have been able to pivot somewhat. So.
Thank you, Kevin. That leads me into the first question that I want to pose to you. What impact did COVID-19 pandemic have on your organization? And I can start again with Peter. You seem to be the first person I'll call once more.
Okay, all right, well, try and jump in the deep end. The question was, what was the impact again? Give me the question again.
Yes, what was the impact of the pandemic on your business?
Okay, well,
Peter, if you can, there's a two-part question, because your business being Garrison Consortium and then the Barbados National Trust, which owns a lot of properties as well.
Right, yeah. Okay, well, from the consortium point of view, it basically brought a complete stop to any income into the organization. So once we really got into about the third or fourth week in March 2020, any rail income had pretty much dried up. Luckily, we had done quite well for the previous year, so cash holdings were pretty good, and literally having to shut down all operations. So all our tours stopped. There were no more dinner presentations, etc. And that has been the case now since March last year through to today. There has been zero income coming in at all. But because of our sustainable approach and the fact that every activity we were running was turning a profit, we have been able to sort of free fly, I think, through the last year. We can't keep that up for much longer. Now, on the National Trust side, quite a bit different. The National Trust has huge overheads. And so, although not all its income came to an end, because roughly about a third of its income is derived from its attractions, the visitors. But because it's essentially a break-even organization, the loss of that operational income from visitors, basically 1/3 of our income was eradicated. That put the National Trust in a very precarious position. So we were left with large overheads and essentially no way to meet all of those costs. So the response of the National Trust had to be entirely different to the response that we could do at the Garrison Consortium. If that answers the question.
So Peter, did you have to lay off staff at the National Trust?
Yes, we did. We had to lay off more than half the staff. What we did is we made an assessment, first of all, of what was the financial damage that was sort of happening after March. And then we had to make a kind of a guesstimate as how long we thought it would go on. So we made a calculation to the end of the year, realized that we couldn't sustain the hit. It would have essentially destroyed our cash holdings. We've been unable to pay our bills and we would have been literally bankrupt. But we calculated that this lack of income would go right through to at least the middle of 2021. At the time, there were numerous people who said, oh no, we'll all be back to normal by October 2020. And we couldn't see it. We said, no, we have to be cautious. And it looks like we're going to run at least to the middle of 2021 without any perceptible income or the operational income. And when we made that calculation, we realized that we would have been dead in the water by that time. We would have had to shut everything down and we would have been bankrupt. So we took steps. Laying off staff amounted to about 25% of the saving that was required to survive. But we couldn't take any more staff off, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to function on any level whatsoever. And then we just started on wholesale cuts right across the board, trying to become more efficient, realizing what we really needed, what we didn't need. And we have succeeded in bringing the National Trust cost level into where we can afford. So we have managed to make the changes at the Trust that will now allow us to survive indefinitely as things are, based on the income that we do have. We can't rely on that because if Barbados doesn't survive, then that income will dry up too, and everybody will be out of work by that time. We are still, I think we were right to have guessed to the middle of 2021, but we know we have to hold on at least until the end of this year.
Thank you, Peter. Kevin, your situation, could you tell us something about your situation at the museum?
Yes, thank you. Much like Peter, having to sit when the pandemic started and make those calculations about how we could reduce costs, because many people might not know this, but Barbadians are free to the museum. So the only persons who pay are regional and international tourists. And at the same time, with all the COVID protocols, the ability for us to earn revenue through venue rental also went down. But what we were able to do in looking at the figures was seeing if we could, in fact, keep staff. In a previous recession, we had actually asked staff to volunteer for pay cuts, which people did. We didn't have to do that at this time. We took advantage of the government taking people on vacation, but also recognizing that some of our revenue we could still begin to bring in terms of grant funding to run particular programs and projects and exhibitions, and moving to some online activities as well, which helped us. But we'll talk about that more. But yes, it wasn't easy. It was actually really difficult, and like Peter, in fact, we thought that things would not return to normal till January 2022. So that's our worst case scenario. But in that, recognizing that we still had to be able to educate Barbadians about their history and heritage, and we still had to be able to bring in grant funding so as to ensure that our programs and activities which we were doing could keep going, and also transition to some new ways of doing work as
which
well,
we'll talk about.
being able to limit, which we'll talk about, but it hasn't been easy. And on top of which, let's say that the stimulus for the heritage industry was not as clear cut as it was for others. As yeah, so
Thank
that's it from
you. Thank you, Kevin. Don Lisa, can we have your input into this? What were the challenges you faced as a result of COVID-19?
Well, quite similar to both the museum and the National Trust and the Garrison Consortium, because our mainstay is tourism, and we were sledgehammered literally during this pandemic. Fortunately for us, our staff is transient. Now, transient is not necessarily the right word. We only really had one person in the office who would be the receptionist with bookings and that sort of thing. But our guides as such would come in as we need them. But of course, now that meant that there's no work for anybody. We too had predicted initially that by the end of 2021, we would see things coming back to normal. And we saw a glimpse of that after the first lockdown and the second, and then we were COVID-free. And we actually were able to get in at least 2 or 3 walk-in tours for locals and a few people with very strict COVID protocols. And so we were like, okay, we knew we were creeping back. But then when December hit, it was like going all the way back to March 2020. So for us, it has been devastating in the sense of there's been no work for anybody within our industry. But at the same time, it has given us an opportunity to look at how we approach the business and new ways of dealing with the business going forward, because the reality of it is even though we are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, COVID is obviously here to stay for a while. And so a lot of the learnings we would have made in this very, very difficult time, we're trying now to see how we can put those in place permanently. But very much like the National Trust and the museum, it has just been a case where there's nobody coming into the island. So there's been no work. We're hoping that there's some light at the end of the tunnel, at least by realistically August, September, because the summer is going to be a real test, but it's just been stopped, literally. That's just how it's been.
Thank you. Some thoughts came up. COVID-19 protocols, reopening your business. How are you going to address those concerns with visitors coming in and your staff and yourself interacting with visitors? If I can start with Don Lisa. Yes.
Well, okay. Well, because we are walking tours, and ours is difficult because I know both museum and Garrison Consortium, we do tours, and I know museum does the in-ear monitors. Now we never wanted that because our tours are theatrical. Literally, we stand there and speechify, for lack of a better word, or old-time Bajan word. But the thing about it is, so what we had originally done, of course, everybody's temperature checked when they come in, their hands are sanitized and all that. What we've required is that all of our guests wear their masks. We've reduced their numbers. We take no more than 10 people. Well, that was before. We haven't done it since I think it was November, December last year, just before everything got bad. No more than 10 people on a tour. We try to, where possible, see if people are from the same household or groups in terms of that. And so everybody is masked up, literally. And the numbers are just smaller because we're walking. For my bus excursions, we only got in 1 bus excursion during that period. And again, it was similar. We operated similar to how the PSVs and those operated. There were less people on the bus. Again, everybody masked and sanitized. Before on our Bajan excursion, we would give out like pastries and ham cutters and those sort of things. We literally cut those out. Just wasn't, you couldn't get your snow cone stop at Cherry Tree Hill any longer. So some of the things that would have required human interacting with each other and passing of hands or touching, we just removed those things. But we kept the singing, and we kept the theater of the tours, but anything that required personal interaction was and had to be removed. And we think until COVID is settled, because there's a big debate about vaccinations now. Until COVID is settled, we will maintain those things and see how it goes from there. We know that most people coming into Barbados now are either going to be fully vaccinated or partially vaccinated, and the Ministry of Tourism and BTI have put strict protocols in place for people entering. So we know that people at least coming in have a certain level of protection, in inverted commas, because we're still not sure fully everybody. But then there's also the locals, because we've been really trying to push heritage to locals, because for me, they're the ones who really, really, really need it. So it is looking on also how we deal with locals, because we may have to have vaccinated and unvaccinated tours. It might just really come down to that going forward until things even out. Hope that answered the question.
Yes, you did. Thank you. So we've heard from, let's hear Peter, from Peter on this question about your protocols, how you're going to manage protocols on reopening.
Okay, well, Donnelly sort of brought up something which is critical, that she understands very well, and that is what we've learned over the years of doing tours is the social nature of doing tours, and the fact that it is less to do with what you're talking about as the relationship between the guide and the clients. And so this is going to be really difficult going forward. And I also sympathize with her over the use of electronic equipment to convey the tour, though we are having to go, we have been having to go that way to deal with foreign languages, and we can see now how that will fit in to the post-COVID situation. What we have not been conducting any tours since the first shutdown. The sort of cost implication to us is just too high to run them for what is minimal numbers of people. But in our plans, it is clear that the tours are going to become slightly more digitized. We have to have a guide there. We have to somehow find a way to maintain that relationship. But there is going to be a level of automation. Beyond that, if I would use George Washington House as an example, because the Garrison Consortium works very closely with George Washington House, and we provide a lot of cruise tours and long stay visitor tours there. What we are doing now is we're sort of redesigning how the facility works, so that we are not expecting everybody that's entering the site to commingle. We've actually divided the site into 3 separate entrances. One would deal with just commercial traffic, the other with walk-in traffic, cafe traffic, sort of long stay traffic, and the third one with cruise traffic and general group tours. We understand that there is a perception by the prospective clients, whoever they are, the cruise, long stay visitors, locals, that your site now post-COVID must be healthy, and they're going to judge us even before they come. So we have to provide a scenario that they will trust. So by first trying to remove the over-concentration or the bottlenecks of people moving through the site is primary. So we're redesigning how the site functions in that way. The same strategy will be applied to the trust properties as well. And in that way, we might be able to allay fears, particularly by the cruise operators, that their customers are going to be infected by other customers, for want of a better description. I think if we can convince prospective customers that they will have the safest possible experience, then we have gone some way to bridging the difficulty. There's a new competition going to come up between different attractions. Who provides the safest attraction? And it's critical that Barbados moves together, everybody moves together in one step. Otherwise, there's going to be disparity in who gets the business. So for us, it is creating an overall operational thing that we can control, ensuring that everybody that works at our sites is actually vaccinated. We have no choice in that particular area. And then providing the actual experience in a manner that is still perceived and in actual fact safer than it was before. With group tours, this is very, very difficult. And to some degree, we're going to be relying on vaccinations. We're just going to see how it works out in practice in the end, if that helps.
Thank you, Peter. Food for thought there. I'll turn to Kevin. I know that the museum, they would have reopened. So how is it going? What protocols have you put in place?
Well, our protocols are in keeping with government's protocols, even during the first coming out of lockdown last year. So as you enter the museum, temperature checks along with sanitizing stations. There's sanitizing stations at every entrance to every gallery. Plus, if you decide to sit outside on our benches, we've placed disposable wipes, and one can wipe down the surface, and waste disposal operated by your foot that you can throw that away. We get spot checks by the Ministry of Health's COVID team to ensure that visitors coming through and us and staff are adhering. So fully masked as you go through. Once visitors have exited the gallery, we will go back through and touch the high frequency touched areas. We're going to be opening a children's gallery later on this year, and we've already put in place that those will be timed tours that have to be booked in advance. We set out what that booking experience time will be, and a half hour to sanitize the gallery before the next tour comes through. As it relates to our coach tours, we'd actually done one I think in October, where again we adhered to government protocols. We have not, like Don Lisa, done any walking tours, but with walking tours again, it's going to be limited numbers and throwaway headphones where we do use any type of digital hearing enhancement. Outside of that, it's one of where small groups, including the tour guide, being masked. For our venue rentals, there's a limit to the amount of people that can use the space according to the Ministry of Health. We adhere to those guidelines and ensuring that there's sanitizing stations as people enter. As we move towards opening back up for tourists, it's going to be around time tours that allows us to sanitize. As Peter said, and he said it in a way that no one wants to say, but attractions will be vying for we are safer. And not only for the tourists, but for our staff, because our staff has to feel that they're working in a safe environment, that the employer is thinking of them in their daily carrying out of duty. So that's very, very critical for us. What we've seen opening back up is locals coming through. We're not charging. We're asking people to give a donation. That has been working for us. We're also reminding them that their donation actually goes towards the upkeep of the museum and the upkeep of Barbadian history. And that's working. We'll see what happens when the tourist season kicks in, and more importantly, when schools start back in September in terms of visiting. But protocols, reduce numbers, ensuring that both the customer and staff remain safe is our priority.
Thank you, Kevin. An interesting point that I'd like us to discuss further. How do we get locals Don Lisa mentioned it, Peter mentioned it, Kevin, you mentioned it. How do we get locals to visit these sites? What plans do you have, or what do you think we need to do to get locals to visit these sites?
Okay. In which order? Who answers first?
Kevin, you can go ahead.
Okay. I think it's a twofold thing. What we've recognized, and I'll use the Duppy tour that we put on last year, which amazed us. It was a bus tour. We'd only done it as we normally do for 1 day, but the response was so overwhelming. We sold out 4 buses adhering to protocols over 4 consecutive weekends because there was simply an uptake in what that tour was, which means that there's potential out there to bring people in, but it's about the event. It's about the experience. Once your experience captures people's imagination, they will come. And I think that's a key takeaway for all of us. I think we all have experiences that people will more come to than others. And I think going forward, that is going to be part of the model. Recognizing it can't happen every single day, but you almost try to carve out a season within the season. That you know that every quarter, maybe a month in every quarter is going to be that pivotal experience that brings people in. And because you've done it, you kind of tease, oh, we're going to do this again later on. So people almost primed, they save their money, they're going to come out. And I found with those tours, they bring family. And that's the other thing. It's just not the adult. The adults bringing the kids in the family, or the adults are bringing the parent or grandparent in the family. So it becomes that wonderful experience that draws people in. And where you can meet people where they are and take them on that experience, I think that's what's going to work for us. And it's been proven that it does work. We just need to do it more often and make it so that it's sustainable enough that it does work. And what I will say for those tours, utilizing theater works. We noticed that, was it 4 or 5 years ago when we started doing the theater productions with the BCC students with Michelle, that they worked. And it made people realize, and it brought, sorry, Don Lisa, I'm going to steal this, it brings history alive. And that is what pulls the locals in. And in our industry, as it were, really and truly, we are made sustainable by the local population. Once we can sustain them, then the influx of the visitor is simply a layer of frosting on top of a really great cake. Horrible analogy, but that's the best one I can use at this time.
You know, Kevin, I quite like that last statement you made, because all 3 of you utilize some aspect of theater in educating the public. And so let's hear from Don Lisa about getting more locals involved.
Well, Peter hit the nail on the head, and I think that I like to give credit where credit is due. Both the NCF and the museum have been doing good work about that, because right now, if not for COVID, NCF would have their big bridge town. This is June; they would have had their fabulous tours of town, and I think that is very, very important. We live in a society, in a world where now everything is very theatrical and theater and social media driven, and it's exciting when Barbadians can touch and feel history up close, and they want to do that. They are excited. I tried to get bookings for Duppy tour and I couldn't even get on. You know, that's how it was.
Listen, the tour got sold out in an hour.
Right, but I was excited because I was like, yes, this is what we need to do. I mean, we as a private company, we can do things on a smaller scale. So I love when the museum and the NCF are doing these things, because then there's spill off for us year round. And I think as long as we listen, we have a whole plan for Bridgetown long. For the 375th anniversary of Bridgetown, and I like to go back because people I look young but old, right? We had living characters line Broad Street. We had a living museum along Broad Street where people could come and see. And this was, I can't remember when the 375th anniversary was, but that was a long, John King sang the jingle. The minister sang the jingle. That's how old it was. He ain't minister now, right? He's minister now. But we all back then, and from the days of the Pelican do Flicky, when we were doing it in 2000 in Pelican and had over 500 people every Wednesday, we showed then that history, once it's brought to life, locals come out. We used to have more locals than we had tourists. And then the locals brought the tourists, right? So as long as you can provide an interactive heritage product with a story, because we used to do like Rachel Pringle Ball and tell the story of when Prince William Henry went in Madame Pringle's night, and we had a whole stick fight and pirates and all kind of thing. So when you can bring history to life, locals come because it's a way for them to teach their children, it's a way for them to learn, and it gets people excited about our heritage. And for me, I wish every day, I tell people, when you go to Pennsylvania, and I compare the Love City to Bridgetown, you can see Thomas Jefferson walking up and down. You can see Betsy, the woman who made the American flag stitching on a street corner. That's what we need in Bridgetown. And each of us, the George Washington House does a great job of it as well too. Each of us in our own little way, we are trying to do that. There needs to be a greater thrust to do that. And it's things we can do now, even within COVID. I keep waiting for the footsteps of slaves to be planted in Bridgetown. So you could walk from where the slaves landed through the slave gate into to Egerton Green and walk, just footsteps on the ground. So as long as we can bring heritage to life, locals will actually sell the product for us to tourists and other people coming here. So we're all doing it. We just want a bigger help from government and different entities to do it even greater. Yeah. I think Sharon, you think?
Yeah, Peter, return
Yeah.
to you. Let's hear about your push to get locals into George Washington House and also National Trust properties.
Yeah, well, it's very hard to better what's already been said. I think we all three are on the same, understand the same thing, and particularly what Annalise was just saying about tourists will follow the locals. I think that is very, very true. The number of times that I hear this in respect of other countries, first check what the locals are doing before you decide what you're going to do, where you're going to eat. You want to go where the locals are lined up the longest, etc. That kind of stuff. That actually does work. Visitors especially, I think in the past it was like this, and now more recently it's become like this again, where visitors are saying they want to visit a place, and the locals are actually going to show them what that place is. It's not necessarily what any of us who may be operating sites have decided what people want to see. And so I'm of the opinion that if we're not getting locals to our sites, then we are doing something wrong as an operator of a particular site. And at the Garrison Consortium, we were running tours that would essentially cater to visitors. They were in the daytime, they were during the week, that sort of thing. It was very hard for locals to go on the tours unless they were on vacation themselves and staying on island. So then we decided, okay, in order to attract locals, we've got to figure out when can they come. We've got to figure out what's the price point, because we have to also bridge a gap that was existing where a lot of Barbadians would say, well, that's just tour stuff, that's not really for us. And we needed to get past that. So as some of you will know, we chose Friday night as a time was the end of the week. People didn't, they didn't want to be doing any work. They were free to go out. And we chose a price that really nobody could say that was a barrier to going on a night tour, and then putting in the drama. The ideas that we had for our night tour were beyond practical. How we thought it up in our heads, it would have been impossible to do. We actually wanted to do basically a moving theatrical stage. where people would peel in and out of the tour doing different characters, and it would be nonstop from start to finish. It would be quite a whirlwind of a tour. Try to put that together was just about impossible, way too expensive, too many people involved and so on. But we managed to find a compromise. And I think the first couple of tours, we had on average 100 people on the first couple of tours, which for those of you that run tours that have anything like that, it feels like 300 to 500 people. Our night tours that were the cheapest thing that we did had the highest return on investment for any of the business that we did. The return on investment was massive because the overheads were relatively low. We had consistently high numbers. The price was relatively cheap, and it just worked. Not only did it work for people going on the tours, but we as tour operators had fun every single time we did it. There was always some kind of side story that we could tell. Then later on in tours, we would add the side stories that happened in earlier tours to the later tours, and just to make it even more interesting. To my way of thinking, if we want to attract locals to anything we do, whether it's an attraction, a National Trust attraction, to a more socialized thing such as a tour, then we just need to imagine what would motivate us to get off of our rear ends in our sitting room and go out and do something, and then try and make it happen. That doesn't always work, because sometimes nobody wants to do what you want to do. But if you get what I mean, we just need to use our imagination, and if it works for us, the chances are it's going to work for everybody else too, or for enough people. And then just try it. If it fails, adjust it, try something else, keep going. At some point you hit the nail on the head and you find out what really motivates people to come and see what you are interested in showing them.
Thank you, Peter.
Yep.
A few comments were made about pivoting, finding new ways of operations. And I would like us to discuss that a bit further. Whether it is marketing, different types of promotion going online, some people moving more towards attracting a different kind of audience, rebuilding the brand, whatever. What are some of the things that you guys would have done in order to help your business remain viable as we come out of this, or as we still traverse our plans to come out of COVID-19?
I think for us at the museum, the main pivot was moving online. Not only in terms of developing new content, whether it was webinars similar to what we're doing now, or moving our lecture series online, doing competitions to engage members in the Barbados audience, especially in what is the long year. What we recognized was we did a series where we asked people to submit their favorite photo for the week. And what we found interesting was that for most people who did, people would comment, oh, how great it was, how it's helping them to deal with the mental issues of being locked down at home. And what that did was to get more people to engage with us online. Some of that then translated into an uptake in webinars and lecture series, taking part in our history group and our genealogy group online. Those audiences grew. And out of that, the ability then to get people interested in providing grants or donations also grew. Shop sales, when you could do curbside pickup, literally picked up. But because of that constant engagement and recognizing that digital platform was there that we needed to take advantage of, and it even made us go back to the table about, well, how do we make our content more accessible, more informative, and more engaging for that platform, which museums aren't necessarily accustomed to. We're accustomed to people coming through the gate, but then you had to switch. And I think that pivot has been important. We've had a social media person, and from there we've actually grown that particular department to having a communications officer who's just dedicated to all of that online content, simply because we recognized that it allowed for engagement and it allowed for interaction with audiences who normally would not have come to the museum, because it was bringing in those people in the diaspora. And we're looking forward to building out that content over the next couple of months, and really making it a core audience for us moving forward. And I think that that is one of the ways in which we pivoted, as well as trying to create content and create new product that persons can access digitally or can come and curbside pick up. So I think that has been one of the benefits, if you want to look at it that way, coming out of COVID. But in there, I would say that there's room for improvement on the policy side to help us. But I'll leave that when we come to that section. But what are some of the other things that can be done through policy and others to help us to grow that out?
Thank you, Kevin. Don Lisa, how about you? What do you have to say?
Well, interestingly enough, because the truth of it is, as a smaller company, and because our requirements for our guides are so specific, we always kept our business very niche. And through the pandemic, because we realized when we had all the debates about Nelson and all of these things, that there was just such a lack of knowledge and also a thirst for knowledge and history of Bridgetown. It forced us in a way to look at our business and to grow it, simply because not just anybody can guide for me. That's one of our major problems. You have to be a very interactive theatrical guide, and not everybody can do that. People can tell you what things are in their history, but they not necessarily can deliver it in a strong way. So what we had to really do, it forced us to go into a position which we were looking to do since 2019, which was to really seek out better other guides, because I can't guide. I have people who say, Donnie, I'm sending a group and I want you, but if I have a meeting for a client, I can't be guiding in town at the meeting too. So it became very problematic, and the pandemic has forced us to relook at how niche we are, meaning that we have to come out of our niche and open up to a wider market. So it's forced us to hunt for 2 other guides who can do the work when Gina, who's also my sister, the other guide, can't be there, because again, it's how we guide. So it's forced us to train and to go into the process of training other people. And it has also forced us to just to expose ourselves to a wider market. Because as I said, our problem really was we were a very specific niche tour, simply because of the availability of our guides. But the pandemic forced us to grow. And when we always did local tours, but they were minor, when local tours, because I just got angry at home going, people are just talking rubbish about Nelson and all this stuff. And I said, oh yeah, I get up and doing a tour though, because y'all got to be mad. The thirst for knowledge among locals, the need to do the tour, and people like Donnie said, we didn't know this existed, la la la. So it's forced us to grow. It pushed us in a direction that we had kind of slowed down and stalled on. It pushed us further along in that direction. So for us, it has been about growth in terms of the walking tour aspect of our business. We don't have a house per se like the museum or the National Trust where people come to us in terms of site to see. We bring people to the museum and different sites, and to George Washington House, actually, they're quite a part of my excursion stops. So in that sense, for us, it's been opening up ourselves to a bigger market and to bringing out some of those same wonderful BCC actors, which I get the joy of being one of their tutors as well, to bring them into the business of theater, which they want to be in from a different perspective, theater and tourism. So for us, it's been about growth.
Some hints about what needs to be done. So we come to the elephant in the room. What do you think should be done to assist the sector to regain its footing and to be more firmly cemented in the creative sector? It's a two-part question. What should be done to assist the sector from the standpoint of the players in the sector, what the players in the sector need to do? And then from a policy point, what do you think policymakers like myself should be able to help the sector to grow and to place it more firmly within the creative economy? I'll go to Peter first.
Yeah, I had the feeling you were going to do that. Okay, that first part of the question. That's a difficult one. If we're talking what should the heritage tourism community do to further enhance or grow the industry in a post-COVID world, if I understand it correctly. A lot of what we've been talking about is how we're intending to move forward. I think the short answer to that question is I don't know exactly what we're going to do to grow in that circumstance. I don't see, in comparison to where we were before, that we are going to grow. I think what we're going to see is that we are going to be better at what we do, and that once we reach a level of tourism that is similar to what it was before, nobody knows yet whether that's going to happen and when, I think all the tourism sectors who have survived will be doing better and stronger. Whether we would have materially grown, I'm not sure, but I do believe that the industry will be more secure. It'll be more reliable. Now, in terms of policy, I think it's the issue of ensuring, to the best of our ability, or possibly the best of your ability, that all the players are moving together to one degree or another in unison, that we are all attempting to put in the same standards, the same protocols for health standards, etc. Not to mention just the general standards in tourism that we must always be seeking to improve. And I say this because if any one of us thinks that we can do better than the others, and that's what we're going to try to do. We're all going to try to do better than everybody else. And if we all try to do that, we're all going to move in the same direction. None of us individually can survive. None of us are going to get more tourists than the rest, or more local Barbadians than the rest. If I think particularly in the visitor area, if the rest of Barbados is not up to scratch, because they're simply not going to come here. So it is very important that all of us, in the heritage community and the wider tourism sector, that we are all seen from outside of Barbados as having all reached the same standards that are acceptable to our visitors. Then once we get them here, the nuances will determine as to which one they're going to go to more than the other. But it is very important that we all move together, and really that is more achievable from a government policy perspective. So we don't want really any deadwood in there. Anybody that's dragging their feet, they need to pick up and catch up with the rest of them, because that will make the whole picture that Barbados is projecting to the world. And that is really the only way that any of us are going to have the ability to grow in the future. And I do believe that our entire tourism sector will come out of this pandemic much stronger than it went in, and it will be much stronger than it would have been if it had never happened.
Peter, you mentioned ensuring all players are moved together. Could that be more handled within the context of an organization? Is there an umbrella body for persons in the heritage sector, if you want to call it that?
I see the heritage sector as part of the rest of Barbados's foreign exchange business, if you want to put it that way. I don't know that a body is required for the heritage sector per se. For example, what, say, George Washington House has to go through, or any of the trust properties have to go through, or the museum, is similar to what, say, the catamaran industry or any of the non-heritage sectors. Since what we are fighting is a health issue as opposed to an industry issue, if you see what I mean. People they're not coming here because they don't want to be tourists anymore. They're not coming here because they can't, because there's a health issue that prevents them from coming here. Part of the solution to that, and as far as I can see, Barbados has been very successful in going the right direction. The solution to that is for Barbados coming out with very high standards in respect of its protocols for COVID or any such pandemic that might happen, crop up in the future. That will provide the confidence for people to come to Barbados. Inside of that, there is then the ability of the heritage sector to improve. It is my belief that the heritage sector would go forward in leaps and bounds if people stop thinking of it as a hobby and realize that it is a viable business. And it's one of the strongest tourism businesses you can get into globally. And so we need to stop treating it as if it is something that is always on the verge of going broke. Once that happens, and more Barbadians understand that heritage tourism, unlike just running water skis or whatever, is a money-making operation, then the entire industry will be stronger because it is truly part of the economy. I don't think there's enough people that believe that to be the case. So they just see it as a bit of fun, something the tourists are interested in, perhaps, and there's no point making a business out of it because everybody seems to be losing money all the time. That's kind of the impression that is given.
Can I jump in, Sharon?
Go ahead.
Because I'm passionate about this. I when I came back to Barbados in 96, 97, and I was talking heritage, people looked at me like I had grown horns. The problem with heritage in Barbados is that our tourism does not focus or push or emphasize heritage. Heritage is now a new buzzword. And heritage is, going back to what Peter said, heritage is actually and can be our greatest income earner. People would come to Barbados if they knew the role Barbados played in the entire growth of the British New World, if people understood who and what Barbados is. But because tourism has always been about, and I love my friends at Garrison Cave and all the catamarans and stuff, it's always about beach swimming with the turtles, right? If I can't even say the word diaspora, knew that this was the first, or understood that the entry point of all African slaves landing in the British Americas was Bridgetown, that would change so many people's perspective about coming to Barbados, especially Black African Americans, right? There's a whole history and a connection and ties beyond South Carolina that we don't talk about. And there are major money earners. You have a whole community of Black people trying to find their heritage and roots. And we are at the start of it and we don't talk about it. So for me, heritage in Barbados can only grow when the government of Barbados put heritage at the forefront and not the back burner. That is the problem. We are still talking turtles and swimming and going to Garrison's Cave when the real emphasis should be on our heritage, our story. Netflix just came out with a whole thing on pirates and the Bahamas. They had this whole thing on the whole thing of piracy and all this stuff. Netflix did a whole documentary on this. And even one of the pirates was Steve Bonnet. He was featured as one of the pirates in the documentary. Where he come from? We are the only body who do not, and I'm very passionate about this, if you want to get down, it's a backup top heritage and the fact that it is ignored in tourism in Barbados and it's now just a catch phrase. It has to be the forefront of policy. All the other industries, including swimming with the turtles, would benefit if heritage was at the forefront, because heritage, personally, I want a 10-foot bronze statue of an African slave landing at where Jamin Scatter, where Ran used to park. So everybody coming in would know that that's where the slaves landed. Whether you went to Jamaica, New York, Virginia, you come Barbados first. We don't talk about that. School children don't know that, right? So the problem with heritage in Barbados is the government of Barbados. It's not this particular government, successive governments. Governments as a whole, right, have never focused on heritage. There needs to be policy. There needs to be commitment to Bridgetown as a heritage site. Is the reason we got a UNESCO World Designation, you know, even our medieval layout. How many Bajans know that we got a designation because of a streetscape? They don't know. The Bajans walk through town every day and have no concept of where they are or who they are or their impact on the world. Until the government and policy and tourism focuses on heritage, we are just a stepchild waiting to be recognized outside who could really bring in the money. And that's I think I've answered all, as my necklace fall off, I think I've answered all your questions in one go. It's policy, and it is that our culture has to and Ministry of Tourism and Culture needs to put heritage at the forefront. It's that simple. Until that is done, nothing will be done, and tourism will fade away, because guess what? You can find sea, sand, and surf in Dubai now cheaper. Okay, they built it. So there you go. So our special story is what can bring people here, and our story just as special or more special than some of the other parts of the New World. So we need to tell it. And that's just it. Sorry, I'm done. That's my soapbox for tonight.
Speaking to the choir, I think we all here feel the same way. Speaking to the choir.
Yeah.
Because
Kevin?
Indeed. Well, let me ease and get half of that soapbox. Yes, 100%, sorry, 1,000% agree with all that has been said. And I think at the end of the day, our policymakers, and especially, our people in finance need to understand that we're sitting on an industry, and I'm going to collapse heritage and the cultural industries into two right now, because cultural industries cannot exist without heritage. The mere fact that somebody get up in the morning and decide to sing, there's a reason why you're singing. There's a reason why you're singing in a particular way. There's a reason why food is being made in a particular way, and that is heritage. What we need to understand is World Bank did a fantastic survey a couple of years ago, and cultural industries and heritage generate $2 billion a year worldwide. In this region, it is a couple billion, but because people lump us together with Latin America, it is going to be skewed more to Latin America than it is the Caribbean. But film, music, food, architecture, design, the way we speak, rum is a heritage industry. Rum generates $80 million a year foreign exchange in Barbados, and that is only a small part of the heritage industry. So if we want to be serious, like Don Lisa said, is we need to understand what is the economic benefit and put in place the policies to ensure its survival, because you never know when one aspect of it becomes that innovation click for someone else, whether it's making a game or writing a novel or doing, I was gonna say a comic book, but it's not comics anymore, a graphic novel. It's all because of heritage. But the policy in place has to be one that incentivizes for preservation and conservation, one that incentivizes the players and the owners of these things in order to maintain them. I'm going to speak to this because it's really national trust and us and ever. We're We survive because of our volunteers. But unlike the United States and Canada and the UK, where volunteer hours are actually tax deductible, it isn't so in Barbados. That is a policy thing that we need to put in place. If I own a heritage property, I know it's there in certain acts like tourism development and cultural industries, but it needs to be expanded more. There should be a greater tax break and tax incentive. For the practitioners, it should be easier for them to attain the financing and the other policies to support what they're doing. As I said, some of the stimulus during COVID went to entertainers. A lot of it didn't come to the heritage sector. Maybe people didn't understand it, didn't quite know what was available to them, but we need to break it down, but recognize that we're sitting on easily $100 million industry disaggregated into maybe 10 or 11 different sub industries, but they're there. But we are not spending the money in which to ensure preservation and conservation on the one end, training on the other, and the incubators that allows for innovation and development of new content and its distribution on the other hand. And it can't all be done by a single entity. So I'm going to disagree with Peter slightly. I think that some type of advocacy, and there are quite a few, maybe we need to have one of those massive brainstorms over a couple months, whether it's ICON Barbados or the BHTA, or let's call them the Performance and Theatrical Association of Barbados, that we all come together with the tourism players and say, listen, there's synergy here that we're missing out on. There are taxes now for persons coming into and leaving the island, all going towards one entity. Great, but there's a potential where a couple cents adds up needs to go towards heritage incubation and preservation and conservation and additional training. So for example, the young people who are being trained at the Ministry of Youth in digital, if that was in place, the young people who are being trained at the Ministry of Culture as it relates to capturing the sites and monuments and places to go on the National Registry, if that was incentivized, it'd be amazing type of content that can be developed as a synergistic product to be utilized to sell our heritage. And I think that we need to see more synergy, but I think there needs to be a greater, I don't call it respect, a greater value placed on heritage. Once we understand what the greater value is, then we have a better opportunity to realize what the value potential is and what the economic potential is, so that we can have those policies in place. And that when an entertainer or someone owns a travel house goes and says, well, I need some money to preserve or to create a product, they don't necessarily have to show 5 or 6 years worth of audited financials. So our ability to risk needs to change as well. We're slightly risk averse. We're risking ourselves into not being able to move forward. So that becomes another piece of the puzzle. But this is great economic potential that we need to now pay greater attention to, because it is one of those sectors whose reach is far beyond the shores of Barbados, where there's a market far beyond the shores of the Barbados, which can bring in foreign investment and foreign exchange earner. But something as simple as trying to do an online transaction where someone in Dubai pays for a bottle of rum in Barbados needs to be made easier. And part of that is a policy decision as well. But realize that the banks are changing, but they had to because of COVID. So thanks for that part so much, Don, Lisa, and Peter.
Thank you, Kevin. We are getting close to the end, not quite. We are now going to open up the floor to questions. I do have some questions and some comments coming in. Andrea Richards responded to the question that was posted suggested that the signature events should be planned so persons could associate a site with activities going on. She was talking about how do we get locals involved. She also mentions ongoing engagement is key and a virtual presence is needed for heritage organizations. We also had Randy Batson, who actually is one of my heritage volunteers, asking the question, what do you think can be done with Bridgetown as a heritage site to enhance its potential as a contributor to the island's GDP? So I posed that question to the group. What do you think should be done to Bridgetown?
You want that, Kevin? You get out. You go.
Yeah. Let me jump in. I'm going to touch a bit on Peter. Sorry, I'm going to touch on the hardscape, and then Don Lisa deal with the human element. And I want to answer because Randy's an old school mate. He looks way younger than I do. I'll give him that. But we sat in class together. Bridgetown was a classic example. And let me deal with the actual fabric. Would it be wonderful if the incentives that are there are much more easily accessible, where the students at SJPI, BCC, Barbados Vocational are given a series of buildings which are used as laboratories in which they do their renovation and do adaptive use of those buildings. And at the same time, some of those same students now who are doing business and entrepreneurship are planning what are the multiple types of activities that can take place in these sites. Because once they're renovated, then you have a core of people who can do maintenance, and that's its own industry. Okay, fine. But now, how do we use the site? And they have to be multiple use. It might be residence and commercial. What are the type of businesses that we move into that space? Some of that can be thought up by young people, and also utilizing young people in conjunction with developers or whomever to make it into a business. So we're now adding a level of sustainability and also adding a level of capacity building that isn't there. The other bit in there is, when are we finding on pedestrianized parts of the city so that we really can take advantage of that medieval streetscape and the ability that at 6 o'clock in the evening when I leave work and I'm hungry, I could go and have a really fantastic Bayesian meal in the middle of Broad Street, surrounded by my history. Or I can decide that I can go down in a converted warehouse / restaurant, or rent it out as a studio apartment for the weekend because I want to get away from the madness, but I want to immerse myself in my culture. All of this is possible in the city with good planning, good policy in place, and incentives. You go to the UK, realize that London doesn't look the way it looked by accident. There are policies in place that recognizes that particular streetscapes and particular traditions need to be maintained, because guess what? People are coming to spend their money to see that. And a lot of it, and not necessarily people from around the world, but people from up north coming down south, all British, but looking to have that particular experience. Until we can do that for Bridgetown, we're missing out, and we're missing out in a big way. And recognizing that it's providing layers of businesses, both for the people doing the maintenance and restoration, the people working out what type of businesses to work in those businesses, but incentive, policy, and proper funding. They can't underfund the people and then they fail. That's my 2 cents on that. I just had to answer that. I'll leave that to the others. Thank you.
I want to jump in. I mean, I know for a fact, because my sister's part of the committee, Gina's passionate about Bridgetown as well too. They're hoping to put plans afoot to transform Bridgetown, but I want us to parallel Boston, Faneuil Hall. You go into Pennsylvania. We don't have to reinvent the wheels. There are cities within the British Americas, going back to the old term, who have maximized on their history and their culture and made their dying towns come alive, because they're things people want to come to and see. And that's what Bridgetown needs. Bridgetown needs to be a living museum, a clean, well renovated, a living museum where heritage is alive, where I'm theatrical. So I want the people walking up and down in costumes who have a story. I want personally, and I'm passionate about it, there needs to be a museum to the ingenuity of the Africans who landed in Bridgetown. We have the Spirit Bond sitting there. I hear the roof still leaking. They got a few little businesses in there. That's a waste of a good property, not insult to the businesses in there by being real. That is a perfect prime spot for a museum. There's also opportunity, like when you go into Boston, Boston has a Freedom Trail, and the Freedom Trail is literally little signage that explains which each points are as you walk through town, because we gotta be realistic about costs. We talk big, but you know what, everything gotta be financed. But in Bridgetown, except for the one little sign outside in Jubilee Gardens that now looking real rundown, there's nothing that says, here's where you are, this is the site of where this thing happened. Or I forget a little cage sign from beside the Chefette and B Workers Union building and the one on the bridge, which you can't see, poorly placed. So there need to be signage until we can get, and there's small steps. I'm very practical and realistic. I can't put 20 costume characters in town tomorrow and all the buildings run down, but we could put up signage. You have the Mr. Rumble's Tavern in Roebuck Street, where we say that rum was invented. You know, when I do my tour, I go with 2 hot dog ladies and I tell my guests, come, we can stand up on holy ground. The 2 hot dog ladies in front of me laughing, because the main point where we are telling visitors that come to Bridgetown that this is where rum was invented has no markations whatsoever, and 2 women selling hot dogs and hamburgers right there. And they'll be part of my tour now, because that's just so stupid I am. I can stand up and take pictures with them because we drinking rum and eating hot dogs. That's where we are in heritage in town. Until heritage can come alive in town, this is a problem. What they've done for the synagogue and that emancipation era is what Bridgetown needs to be transformed to. Traffic needs to come out of Bridgetown. It needs to be cobbled. The cobblestone still there. We know it there. Put down the cobblestone, have clear signage saying this is where you are, this is what's happening. And for me, I said it 3 times, I can say it 4 times again. We need a monument coming out of the water by the BTI car park where jamming scatter around, where the Dream Chaser Park now, that's for young people, where they say that was the first entry point for all the African slaves. Where's the signage? Where's the monument? Where is that? Bridgetown, for heritage to come alive, Bridgetown has to have appropriate signage. That's step 1. And step 2, then we could put in all the little things. And step 3, then it needs to become a pedestrianized city with cafes all along the boardwalk and so on. And we will see a transformation in our tourism in town, and Bridgetown will come back to life, because half the businesses have moved out as it is right now.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in now, because I think we all 3 are pretty hot on this issue. And I think Kevin said something before about we don't like taking risks. And I think this is a prime example where we don't want to take the risk that Bridgetown has tremendous value in its heritage. But when I look at it, I think, well, Bridgetown needs to be nice to people. If it isn't nice to people, people aren't going to want to go there. You need to enjoy yourself when you go to Bridgetown. And I don't know how many people actually enjoy themselves when they go. It seems to worship the car. We have all that waterfront, and most of it is viewed by cars as they go by. The Spirit Bond that Don Lisa mentioned, it really doesn't work because there's a bit of a highway just outside. It's not pleasant to go there. Irrespective of the roofs leaking, it seems that we can't maintain a roof like was done 200 years ago. It's pretty much a nonsense. We should look at Bridgetown. If you want to look at it in the modern context, just look at it as a mall without a roof on it. And we should look at it like that. The idea of pedestrianizing it is I don't even know why we're still talking about it. It is not rocket science. So we could pedestrianize so much of it from the wharf all the way through to James Street, at least. And if not all down Roebuck Street, we could do at least the High Street. All of that area in Hero Square, Trafalgar Square should be pedestrianized. There should be no traffic going down the wharf at all. We have 2 forts that are buried under car parks. And why are they buried under car parks? They're just money waiting to be happened. The water spaces are underutilized. The bridges are not made enough of. And why do we have a bridge where at one point the curb is about 9 inches off the rest of the road? We're just asking people to break their ankles. We're not friendly to pedestrians. Why do we send people down a boardwalk and then ask them to go down a ramp about 1 meter wide to cross the road and then skin the top of their head if they're over 6 feet trying to walk under the Chevette overhang? It's so unfriendly. Cars are in your way. We just need to make Bridgetown nice to people. The answer, and this would be something that people expect to come out of the National Trust, is not building shiny new buildings in the hope that everybody would think this is wow and we'll go to Bridgetown. We kind of tried to do that with Kensington Oval and it didn't really work for Fontebelle. And I think we need to have a little more confidence in the things that we have and our abilities to say that there is a huge amount of beauty in Bridgetown that has been obscured by something that is only skin deep. And it won't take much to unveil that. And the ideas that Kevin had of basically getting our students, or young people involved, that is exactly where we should be going. The excitement that can be created by just getting people involved in recreating the spaces. When you consider that adaptive reuse is actually what has been happening all the time anyhow. It is just a normal thing that we do. It is not something that we really have to recreate. It's just part of the normal process. And to me, there's nothing more exciting than taking something that exists and making it even better, or injecting new life into it. And then the city remains human. It's something that people can identify with. And it's not just for visitors. Then Barbadians will return to Baxter's Road. One of the best places in Bridgetown, well, there's 2 great places in Bridgetown to me. One is Palmetto Square, all under tarmac. Should not be. If you can imagine what that place could be like, it would be almost the heartbeat of Bridgetown, where you've got the politicians on the one side and you've got the rum shop on the other side and so on and so forth. And the other great place is Nelson Street. There is so much value in Nelson Street, not in everything, of course, but Nelson Street architecturally, style-wise, is an area of town that could contribute so much to Bridgetown and everybody's experience. And we're missing the boat. And if we don't pay attention to it, we're going to lose it. And it's a little bit like heritage is like a gold mine. You can't put it back really once it's gone. It's a resource that cannot be, how you call it? It cannot be replaced. There's an authenticity that is required. And we are stretching the limits and we are going to miss the boat. But Bridgetown should be one of the jewels in the crown of the Caribbean. That's what it should be. And it has that opportunity more than just about any other city in the Caribbean, with the possible exception of Havana.
And in that case, Peter, if I can, and Sharon, here's the challenge. Bridgetown is going to be 400 years in 7 years' time. What can we do to advance all that we've just said about bringing that city back to life, about having adaptive use, about having innovation, about having capacity? I dare say COVID now becomes, in a way, the catalyst for us to begin to implement those concrete changes. And I think we should. Whether it is multi-agency, whether it's getting together with multi-agency and private sector, this is the opportune time to do so. I know that one of the major developers sent around a poll a couple of weeks ago asking questions about Bridgetown and how it should be lived. I saw the poll, I answered it, but I realized that in all things, questions can be skewed. Because the one question that wasn't asked was, would you live in in an adaptive building in the city, as opposed to asking people if they would live in a high rise in the city? It's about adaptive reuse for me. And Alexandria, Donisa, is my favorite small city to visit, which reminds me of Bridgetown because it's on the waterfront, and how they've turned their warehousing and ever buildings into businesses and restaurants and places to live and send your kids to school, and facing the water. For whatever reason, I know we don't like to swim, but we have that aversion. We need to face the water and understand that is the billion-dollar view. And that is one of the catalysts for returning people to the city. And as for Nelson Street, is I think the New York club that had a really nice renovation a couple of years ago. There are tons of mixed buildings, whether they're wooden or brick or rubble or combinations of in Nelson Street and Commerce Street that need to be renovated, that are so beautiful, and we're losing them. Because again, there's not that incentive in place for the people who own them to upkeep them, and we need to do so. And we don't know what that level of adaptive reuse can do to the spirit of the people of the city, and how that might then breed innovation and the businesses that we keep talking about. But we need to make it happen. And I think that's our challenge for the next 7 years. And let's set ourselves that and see what we can achieve.
I hear you loud and clear, Kevin. I hear you loud and clear, and I'm very pleased to hear people mentioning Nelson Street. I got the chance to visit St. Augustine in Florida a couple of years ago, 2019. And immediately when I saw the transformation of those streets, those small streets with the small shops, came to mind, this could be Nelson Street. And I agree with you. Everyone said the same thing. We're sitting on a fantastic resource that we need to put some thought and energy and commitment into resuscitating. So I am coming to the end of this evening's discussion. It was one of many. I see that we will have many more evenings together, Kevin.
No problem.
Might be in a rum shop somewhere, Kevin, as soon as COVID abates.
a good historic rum shop, thanks.
That's right. That's right. So I'm going to I would like to thank my panelists this evening. It has been a very informative evening, a discussion, the start of many. So many things there have been taken notes feverishly. So many things that we need to grab hold on and move on. As Kevin said, COVID provides the opportunity for us to pivot and to do things a different way. We've heard how COVID has impacted the various businesses in the heritage sector. We also learned of how these businesses have been pivoting and the interesting strategies they've put in place to go forward. I think that we need to put more. We understand that more is needed to make this sector more sustainable. And coming up over and over again, policy, funding, legislation, all of these are needed to advance such things as restoration and conservation, and even public education and awareness I'll put in there, because that is key to it all. For us to be able to preserve what we have, we need to understand and appreciate it. So I come to the end of my evening's soiree. I would like to thank Ariane Grosvenor from the National Library Service. He's been our technical person this evening. I'd also like to thank my heritage volunteers who are on, and I have a core of Give Back students who are working with us for Heritage Month. As you know, the entire month is dedicated to promoting heritage awareness, giving it a little bit of a profile, a little bit of a oomph. We have a very packed calendar. Our various stakeholders have done tremendous work in putting forward a calendar Someone asked me, how y'all got all these things into this calendar? But we have a core team of the various members, the National Library Service, the museum, BTMI, NCF, and the list goes on. And they've all put activities into the week. So I would like us to remember next week coming up, we have yet another webinar in this series, where we will have a panel of youth discussing the potential of heritage. So I'll ask you all to join us again. And I thank you for joining us, and keep viewing our Facebook page and also the National Library Services YouTube channel and the Facebook pages of the other agencies. So good evening, everyone.
Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington. This meeting place, this melting pot, this entry point for the builders of our nation. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our military, we celebrate for centuries of history. Big it up. Tradition and culture, our heritage. Historic Bridgetown and its garrison. Big it up. Our Bridgetown, jewel in our crown, worldwide renowned, from Garrison to Kensington. This meeting place, this melting